Title is what's your actual title?
My actual title is Director of Sports Science and Return to Play Associate Coordinator. Very
Okay,
fancy titles.
and you're also, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're also considered a strength and conditioning coach, or you're not considered a strength and conditioning coach.
That's correct. I do
Okay.
go out and act as a strength and conditioning coach as well, although I sit outside of the five.
Okay,
So,
so two questions. A, that position is probably one of one at LSU, but then
correct.
also, how much has what you've done changed since, and this is kind of what number one was, since Scott left and then you kind of jumped up into that position?
Yeah. So it is one of one at LSU. Me and Scott co founded the sports science division at LSU. The Olympic staff does not have a dedicated sports scientist. So I am the only one at LSU. It was before it was me and Scott. Now I have an assistant. So, but as director, I'm the only one at the entire university. I am actually trying to collaborate a bit more with Olympic and get a sports science initiative going over there as well, because I think the university would benefit from that. And I love LSU, so I want the university to benefit. So yes, one of one title, and some other schools have one. Like I know Texas has one, Sam Contorno. There's a few other. It's becoming more popular in college football for sure to sit outside of the five. So you have like a sixth guy basically. And the things that I've changed since Scott left. So real brief for the audience out there. Scott Kuhn and I worked together on sports science at LSU football. We created the division. We built the entire thing from scratch. I mean, I don't even think the university had Catapult or anything when we got here. We really built the whole thing. So when he left for the New York Jets, I bumped into the director role, and I changed a lot. I changed the entire structure of the division. So the division now has five subunits. The five subunits that my division works in is strength and conditioning. That's just your typical, what you think of sports science. Return to play, which is what we did our first podcast on. So if anyone's interested, then go back and listen to that. I make a huge investment into return to play. It's a massive piece of any program. The third one is football periodization. That is practice planning. That is athlete monitoring in season. That's going to be the topic of our discussion today, obviously. That is a huge piece of what I do. Practice periodization, all of that, GPS monitoring. Number four is culture. So we touched on this in our first podcast as well, but we track everything in the culture, everything discipline wise, everything off the field. I mean, I could tell you 4 years ago who missed a supplement. Like we track the hell out of all that stuff. And it's a cornerstone piece of our program under our former head coach. So it's a big deal for us. And, culture to me is like the most important thing, right? Juice, energy, intensity, violence, and then, of course, having the players do the right thing all the time. Standard is high across the board, no matter what we're doing. And then the fifth piece is recruiting. So I am fairly involved in recruiting. I do all of the recruiting presentations. For 4 years now, I've handled all of the funding kind of speaking roles. So we have a funding group at LSU called TAF, TAF. They always come around on game days. They do tours. So I've kind of had the lead on that for 4 years, doing the speaking, and I have a whole experience. I kind of bring them through. It's a whole big deal, but to me, that's massively important because talent is kind of the engine that, drives wins. So at least in terms of your roster build. So I'm involved in that. So 5 subunits, S&C, RTP, football periodization, culture, and recruiting. All of that stuff I do. I do all of that work. I act as a regular strength coach. So pretty much all of that now falls to me.
It's a lot of shit.
Yes.
So you mentioned that the first conversation we had was focused. I mean, we touched on all of those, some of them. Return to play. You broke down some of the culture piece, which I thought was really, really interesting. And to systematically do that seems like such an incredible undertaking, but impactful for sure. So I want to get to what we wanted to really discuss within this conversation today. And you sent me and Mike a pretty incredible presentation titled In-Season Athlete Monitoring System. And that is a broad title, and there's a lot of intricacies to what you sent us. However, I want to just give you the opportunity, a couple minutes, to really just like explain this in-season athlete monitoring system from like a broad 10,000 foot perspective of like why you created it, what the main pillars are within it, and then we can dive into the intricacies of it.
Can I just stop you, Joe, before you go, though? And I just want to say, when I went through that thing, like I was going through it, and then I got to the very last slide, and I literally, when I got to the very last slide, I literally like audibly said like, "No fucking shit, dude." Like that was so impressive that, I mean, I think it was what 9 games or something like that. 90 at
Yeah,
that point,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
8 games, and it was like, holy fuck, dude! Like
Oh wait,
for a
say that
football
you
team to
you
be able
didn't
to
even
do that is like,
say the
goddamn.
punchline. Say the
We'll get
punchline.
to it, dude. We'll get to it.
Okay, all
I'm
right.
sure
We'll
we'll
tease
get
it.
to it.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, Jordan, take it
Yeah,
away.
yeah. I think the last slide was the player availability, right? Was the I think we're at the time a few weeks ago averaging 98% roster availability. We're down to about 97, 97 and a half, something like that. But obviously, really good. Part of that's luck too, right? But I think we do a good job as a staff keeping players available. But to answer your question, Hunter, the in-season monitoring system. So, uh, have you guys ever seen Dark Knight? Right, you've seen the first Dark Knight where
Yeah.
Batman is kind of going through the building looking for the Joker, and he has that like sonar vision. You can see through walls. Right, you remember that scene? So that is what this system is for our athletes. It is a sonar vision view into the athlete across multiple streams of data, across multiple types of data, external workloads, internal responses, all of that. And it combines everything into one platform. So what I was seeing as I was coming up in sports science is, every program has Catapult. They do their force plate CMJ. They have their Nord board. They do their ISO tests. Maybe they have a questionnaire, whatever, right? They have all of these technologies and data streams that come flying around, and they test their athletes, but nobody does anything with it. Like everybody does their jumps or whatever, but they don't know what to do with it. They wear their Catapult, but they don't even know what they're looking at. They don't know how to intervene on anything. And especially in season, like I call the project Rainmaker. Rainmaker is an old school Wall Street term for somebody that makes a lot of money. And I call it that because a sports scientist makes their money in season. Everybody gives all the attention to the off season, like training bucketing and all that. And that stuff's all great. I love that stuff. But a sports scientist makes their money in season by keeping players available on the field and keeping their performance as high as possible, right? So they can practice a lot, they can play a lot, and they can do that hard and violent intensity, right? So what I wanted to do is we have at LSU, I have Catapult, I have force plates, I have a Nord board, I have a force frame, we do questionnaires, we have all this data, right? And I wanted to combine it into one system so we actually knew when do we need to intervene on an athlete, when is an athlete at risk for injury, not that we can predict it, but at least when do we know, do we intervene? And I'll walk you through a quick problem, right? So let's say you're tracking your GPS and you see an athlete has a workload spike. Do you jump in and pull him back or no? A lot of people would jump into practice and say, hey, we got to pull this guy out. But is that actually true? Like, how do you know an athlete actually needs a workload reduction? Or I see a lot of times people jump on a counter movement jump, right? The RSI is down and they say, hey, the athlete needs to do less. Is that actually right? Like, how do you actually know when an athlete is truly at risk and running hot? So what I did is I created basically a sonar vision into the athlete, a big flagging system that combines all of our streams of data. It works in 5 categories and it assigns a risk label for each of our athletes. So the 5 categories are your GPS workload, that is your Catapult, neuromuscular, that is our CMJ test, soft tissue robustness, just a fancy way of saying all of our ISO testing. So that would be like a Nord board, an ISO 30, plantar flexion, adduction, abduction, all of that type of stuff. Nutrition, so that's things like body weight trends. And then a wellness status. And for us, we do a wellness questionnaire every day. Athletes fill out a couple questions. It's really easy. And that goes into the system as well. So I can capture all of that, right? I can capture that internal response. I can capture their body weight trends. I can capture when they're showing weakness or major asymmetries on an ISO test. I can capture when the counter movement jump, RSI is down, those types of things. And then, of course, I can capture workload spikes. But to me, if I'm going to pull an athlete back in practice, or if I'm going to intervene on an athlete in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a practice reduction, extra ISOs, extra treatment, whatever it may be, I want to know why I'm doing that, how hot is an athlete running, and at what level of intervention do we need to actually make because not all interventions are created equal. I don't want to just be running in and out of practice and pulling people out of practice, because practice is how you get better at the game. So we need to practice. We need to practice a lot. We need to practice hard. And before I get to that point, I would rather intervene with things like extra treatment or ISOs or a nutrition protocol or something to catch the athlete before they reach, a really high risk marker, something like that. So a long story short, the athlete monitoring system has 5 categories. It takes all of them into consideration. It's a big flagging system. And then ultimately it spits out a risk label on each athlete: low, medium, high, and needs immediate attention. It's very simple. There's 10 total flags, and it's basically a stoplight system that anybody can view in 5 seconds and know where every single athlete stands and what we actually have to do about it.
Yeah, really good way to kick us off, to give us everybody kind of some background information on what it is. One of the things that I just wanted to throw in there as a small anecdote that I thought was connected to something that you said early on was, you see a workload spike, some people just are like, we got to pull them out. And I posted a video the other day of some just like pregame jumps that we did. And the question that I always get anytime I post a video of pregame jumps is, what do you do if jumps are down? And I think that a lot of people, and it's potentially naive to think, but it's also not like out of bounds to think, because I think that is what everybody goes to, is like, okay, jumps are down, what do you do? And in my head, with the streams of data I have, it's like, well, it can lead you to asking further questions, referencing other things, but it's not like modified reactive strength is down, hey coach, you need to play half the minutes. It's like, that would be drastically taking things way past what they should. So I think that, like, what I love about what you've said so far and looking through the presentation is it's not like I'm hanging my hat on jumps. I'm not hanging my hat on monitoring. I'm hanging my hat on a collection of like holistic stress to then be able to give a better frame of reference, as opposed to just like, his jumps are down, he said he's tired, let's have him practice half. It's like, well, there's a lot of other things that can go into this as well.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. That's exactly right. I just want to touch on this real quick. So this is a really important point you made, Hunter. Whenever you're making an in-season decision on an athlete, you need to understand how levered you are to certain data streams. So I just saw something on social media where it was a sports scientist at another school, I will not name it, but they had a really intricate like flagging system based on their CMJ. And it was how much work the athlete will do that day in season based on their counter movement jump. And it was really well done. The only problem with that is you're so levered towards one test. I mean, what if the warm-up didn't go well and they just had a bad jump? I mean, you're going to make a whole day's decision or multiple days decisions based on like 3 jumps. Like that's a really tough sell to me, especially if I'm making a decision to recommend pulling a player out of practice or doing less work. Like that is something you've got to sell to the coaching staff. So I put out a quote on Instagram not too long ago, and I said, a sports scientist is like a sniper. So first off, when you're pointed at a target, you need to make sure that your scope is dialed in right? And secondly, you need to actually make sure that you're pointed at the right damn target. So just because you're using a piece of technology and it tells you, hey, the RSI is down. Okay, cool, I'm going to pull him out of practice or workload reduction him. Just because you're using a piece of technology doesn't actually make you sure that you're making the right decision. I mean, you could be making the wrong decision. So like I said, maybe the kid had a bad warm up. Maybe it's early in the morning and he just doesn't want to do the damn jumps, whatever the reason is. And now you're making a decision based off bad data. So you never want to be too levered. You want to take multiple streams of data, diversify yourself. So when you're making a decision or some level of intervention, you can be damn sure that you're making the right call. And that's really nice, because when I go up to a coach and I say, hey, this guy's running hot, we got to do something in practice. Well, I have tons of conviction on that because I've got a ton of data to back it up from multiple different streams over long time periods. So to me, it's like making an investment, right? You diversify. You don't ever just push your chips into one thing and, leave yourself open to potentially making the wrong decision. So I just wanted to touch on that. It's a very, very important point.
So I want to summarize real quick and try to here. One of the things, or the thing that kind of sets you off within the inception of this process was you saw these streams of data that weren't necessarily all going to one decision making process. It wasn't formulated together, and that's what kind of launched you off. Is that correct, or am I off the mark there?
Yeah, you're correct. I mean, I saw us and I see a lot of other people at the same time. So it's just my observation. Do a force plate jump, do a Nordboard test, do an ISO squeeze of some sort. And it's like, what do you do about it? What do you actually do with that information? And I just saw a lot of people either do nothing. And if you do nothing, you're basically just wasting a bunch of money, right? Like you'd be better off probably selling all the technology, sell your catapult, save the money, and go buy better players in the transfer portal, you know? So for me, I want to get ROI. If we're going to spend money on technology, then we need to get some ROI out of it. So I wanted to combine all of it so we make the best decision. And yes, Mike, to your question, I basically saw these independent streams of data, in nice, good looking charts, all of that stuff, but they're independent of each other. And the athlete is not independent. The athlete is an organism. So if I have a workload spike, if two athletes have the same workload spike, like let's say we're looking at acute to chronic, and they both have a 2 on acute to chronic, which is a pretty high workload spike. One of them may handle it better than the other because maybe one of them has really weak hamstrings. Maybe one of them's very asymmetrical. Maybe one of them already has a high level of accumulated fatigue that we can see on a force plate and we can see on other metrics. Maybe one of them, is down 10% in their body weight over the last 2 months. There's other things to consider beyond just these independent streams of data. They work together. So my model works together. And I'll give you a quick example. Let's say a kid has a workload spike on high speed distance. So he's sprinting a lot in practice and in games. If that same kid also has really weak hamstrings relative to his position group and a big asymmetry, then his flagging system gets a multiplier on it because he's not as robust as other athletes are. He's just not. He has weak hamstrings and they're asymmetrical. So he's not going to handle workload spikes as well as an athlete that didn't have that problem. So the model works together because all of these data streams do actually work together because we're looking at an organism. We're looking at a human being, an athlete. So we need to consider all of these data streams together and then ultimately give us one risk rating that anybody can look at in a simple format. It's basically a red light, green, a red light, stoplight system, and we can make an immediate decision off that. So if anyone's interested in actually seeing what it looks like, it's right on my Instagram page. It's on my LinkedIn. You can go there and find it easily. It literally just shows an athlete's name, the 5 categories I spoke of, how much risk they're running, low, medium, high. And then all the way on the right side, it gives a total risk score of low, medium, high, or needs immediate attention. And from there, we know exactly what to do. We have a little heat map. If a guy's medium, we make a targeted intervention like extra ISOs, treatment, a nutrition protocol, something. If he's high or needs immediate attention, we look at making a workload reduction. So it's very simple. It's targeted. It's straight to the point, and it brings every single person in our organization on the same exact page of what's going on with the data and what the hell do we do about it. And that's the biggest thing. It aligns everybody, sports med, S&C, sports science, and the football coaches. So it's simple and it's actionable.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is like getting everybody on the same page because it's really cool for you to sit in your office and see this. But if it's like the coach, when you go to him, is like, yeah, I'm not taking this guy out of practice and he like needs immediate attention and he's like, no, he's going to practice. Then it's like, well, how relevant is the system? But when you have a coaching staff that's bought in and understands and everybody can see it and speak the same language, which from speaking to Scott originally when he was there, speaking now to you 1.5 times, it sounds like that everybody in your building is speaking a similar language based on what the information that you're presenting, which is really the name of the game. So I wanted to dig into the weeds of this system a little bit more and dissect it a little bit more. And the first thing I wanted to hear from you is these categories. So catapult workload, soft tissue robustness, nervous system readiness, nutrition, body weight trends, and wellness state. Do you weight these at different levels? So like is catapult workload weighted higher than wellness state, or are these the same across the board whenever you go to create this flags per player rating?
Yeah, it's a great question. So they are not weighted equal. The GPS, so there's 10 total flags. So it's a 0 to 10 scale. Simple. The GPS has 3 total maximum flags. The neuromuscular or counter movement jump, whatever you want to call it, has 2 maximum flags. The ISO tests, soft tissue robustness, gets you to 2 maximum flags as well. So that's 7 total there. Body weight trends can get you 2 maximum flags, and then the wellness gets you 1. All of that added together is 10, and then it works on a 0 to 10 scale.
How often are these tests being performed? So like the ISO 30, the CMJ, you're probably weighing guys in every day. Questionnaires are probably easier to get, but from a logistical perspective, like an ISO 30 on 100 something dudes, probably not the most efficient. Well, you probably make it efficient, but how often are you testing these?
Yeah, so we wear Catapult any practice or game. So we practice 4 times a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and of course we play on Saturday. So they wear those 5 times a week. We jump once a week. We do our ISO testing once a week. We weigh in currently twice a week, although in the off season we weigh in daily. And our wellness questionnaire is done every single day that we have a football related activity, except for game day. So right now that is 5 days a week. That would be Monday through Friday. So we get a good bit of data. And the thing I think I love the most about this and kind of how I've set our system up is I only ask for like 5 reps a week from guys, 3 jumps and 2 ISO reps on something, whether it's a hamstring ISO on ISO 30, plantar flexion, adduction, abduction. It's 2 reps. That's it. So I ask them for 5 reps total per week and nothing else. So for each athlete, I'm testing them for like 60 seconds. That's it. And from there, we can have one of the best athlete monitoring systems in all of sports. And I think this also goes to a key point of systems are more important than the technology. I mean, I literally have 1 Nord board, 1 force frame, and a couple force plates and Catapult. Yeah, and I'm at LSU, we got a lot of resources. So you don't need to have 15 different things and 400 different technologies and 3D movement cameras and whatever, like thermo cameras. You don't need all that. You just need a couple things. You need really good data, and you need a great system, and you need even better collaboration. And that's why all this works.
So to dig in a little bit to some of the more individual tests. So let's start with the catapult workload, because obviously 3 potential flags. There's a lot of information that you're going to get out of it. Obviously, when you collect catapult, you get a ton of information. So dialing into what's most important, you mentioned high speed yardage, I think, a little bit. Can you just talk about, okay, what's most important? What am I pulling out of here? What am I really trying to keep my eye on?
Yeah. So whenever I do anything, I try to keep it very consistent across the board for the entire organization, because it's very easy to lose people in catapult, in sports science, in data. People get overwhelmed easily, especially because the sports scientist in the building is the expert on the data stuff. So I always use the same metrics across the board for everything, because that's what gets people used to actually seeing that stuff. So whether it's us, sports med, they're all used to seeing the same metrics. So I use 6 total metrics for anything. I use player load and distance. Those are my volume metrics. And then I use high intensity XLs, decels, high speed distance, and high intensity COD. From there, I chose 3 metrics for our skill and big skill players and 3 metrics for our power players. Power players are the linemen, offensive and defensive linemen in football. Our skill and big skill players get flagged on player load. So that's a volume metric. High speed distance, that is all the yards accumulated over 75% of their max speed, and high intensity accels and decels combined. So 3 metrics, 1 volume, 2 intensity metrics. The power guys get the same thing. They do player load, high intensity accels and decels, and high intensity changes of direction. Those 3 are measured currently on acute to chronic, and I have some layers of flags that go in there. So real simple, I'll just give you a kind of a view at how I flag them. If you're above 2 acute to chronic on one of those metrics, let's say you're at 2 acute to chronic on player load for 1 day, you get 1 flag. If I'm at 1.7 for 1 day, I get a half a flag. If I'm at 1.7 for 2 days in a row, I get a full flag. So that's kind of the logic there. There's a little bit more to it. I don't need to go into every number and every layer of flag. We'd be on here forever. But that's how it works. So it works through layers, and it works through acute to chronic, and it works through multiple different metrics. So I'm tracking volume, I'm tracking some level of intensity, and I'm trying to use some metrics that are somewhat specific to the position groups themselves. So it's specific. It hits volume, it hits intensity.
So before we get too into this, my mind is like exploding on the actual process of collecting this information, and especially with a team of 100 people that you're trying to do this. Like, did you code some type of AMS system to be able to pull all these streams and create these flags for you, so where you're just punching in, well, maybe not even punching in, it's streams of data going into your system that's then giving you these flags, so at this point you just collect the data and it does the work for you?
Yes, you have to.
Yeah.
You have to do that. So yes, I code in R. So I built an entire code in R. Basically, I built an entire AMS in R, and then it all flows into Power BI. So it's free. It costs me nothing. I pay $0 for it. And all of the outputs you see that I put out, whether it's on social media or anything, most of those are from Power BI, built custom for me from that piece of code. So yes, I have an API in there. I collect the data. I download it from Catapult in this case. I hit go on the code. It downloads it in a few minutes, and I run the report. Pretty simple. It probably takes 5-10 minutes in total.
So, okay, so the catapult stuff, I mean, it makes sense, right? You're simplifying it. You're picking your metrics of most important. When it comes to some of this other stuff, so I feel like you could have, like, so very straightforward, the catapult stuff. I feel like you could have definitely gone in a lot of different directions, though, with soft tissue, with nervous system readiness. So how did you actually land on ISO 30? And then we can get into CMJ as well, because we'll have questions around that. But I think ISO 30 is a good place to start, because you have the world's your oyster and you landed on that. So how'd that happen?
Yeah, so actually, I'm expanding this to a few different tests, but the ISO 30 is kind of the one I highlight the most because, one, so for those that don't know, an ISO 30 is basically a long lever hamstring maximal isometric test. So if anyone is familiar with the Nord board, basically you put your ankles in the cuffs, and I have my athletes walk out on their hands all the way to a push-up position. They're in 150-degree angle at the knee, so it's kind of like a sprint-specific angle, so to speak. And they basically push their legs into the cuff like a maximal ISO for 3 to 5 seconds. So it's a really simple test. So I chose that because, one, it's simple. Two, it causes no soreness in season. Like a regular Nordic curl can cause soreness. It's kind of mentally taxing. It's kind of uncomfortable for some athletes. So I think the athletes like the ISO 30. It's easy, it's simple, it's fast, and it hits a very important muscle group, the hamstring. The hamstring protects the ACL. It draws on the tibia. It's obviously a major muscle group in terms of performance. So that was where I started. You know, the hamstring test to me is kind of a non-negotiable. You got to have it somewhere in your system in a field sport. We are going to expand this. I'm adding in and have added in an adduction squeeze and abduction push on the force frame, and then a plantar flexion maximal ISO push on the force frame as well. So now we're getting one at the hip, knee, and ankle. So those will just rotate through the weeks. So I'll do an ISO 30, let's say on week 1 of the season. Then the next week I'll do an adduction abduction. The following week I'll do plantar flexion, and then we'll come back to the ISO 30. So the way it works for me is, let's say I run an ISO 30, all the players do their hamstring test. We have some guys that are flagging medium and they have major asymmetries or they're weak. And we decide, hey, we have a group of guys that need some extra isometrics, single leg ISOs, things like that in the season because they're hamstring deficient. Well, then we put them into that group and they get that work and they get that intervention during the lift, right? Or after or extra. In some way, shape, or form, we get it done. And then we go through our season and then we retest that in 3 weeks because in the meantime, we've tested the plantar flexion and then we tested the adduction abduction the following week. And then by the time we get back to the ISO, we can actually see, okay, what did our intervention actually do? Like, are those guys still at risk? Are they getting better? Is the intervention working? So there's a few things going on there. One, we can intervene, but two, it kind of creates this nice little rotation where when we do intervene, we can then just retest them in a few weeks. So it kills a few birds with different stones, if that makes sense.
Yeah, whenever you first said that, I was like, oh, that kind of sucks that you just don't get them all every week. But then, like, the rotation makes sense because then, as you said, you're able to, like, test the intervention. You know, like, you see asymmetry, you see potential weakness, and it's like, okay, you test the next week, that intervention probably hasn't done much. But if you get 3, then there's potential to see some change. Now, one of the things that I wanted to touch on within this specific topic, there seems to be, like, certain things that me and Mike like to just talk to certain guests about. And one of the things that is really intriguing to hear about people's perspective, because it's such a hot topic within our field, is asymmetries. And there's a host of people that say, if you see asymmetry, it's a flag immediately. There's another host of people that say if you see asymmetry, but it's been present and the athlete's healthy, then it's not a flag. And potentially with that individual, if you see something become more symmetrical when they've never been symmetrical and healthy, then that may be a flag. So what are your thoughts around asymmetry and how you flag it from that lens with this specific assessment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So asymmetries are normal, in my opinion. They're not something that you necessarily have to worry about unless they are just so massive that you can't ignore it, or the athlete has an accompanying underlying weakness. So the way that my ISO test works, and if we go back to the flags, my ISO can give you 2 maximum flags, one of which is based on weakness and one of which is based on asymmetry and trends. So the way that I think about it is, I hear a lot of people, they say, well, if my athlete's like 10% or more asymmetry, they got to do something about it. And to me, I'm looking more first at, is the athlete weak? So I actually run all my numbers through my all-time data, and I have a bunch of normative data and basically standards on each test, just like you would for like a squat test, right? Like, what's a good squat? 2 times body weight, 1.7 times body weight, whatever. I have that for all of our ISOs. So I know what's average and what's below average and what's very good. So if an athlete is below average strength and they have a major asymmetry, well, now we're talking about something that might actually be an issue. But if an athlete's really strong and they have a 10% asymmetry, that doesn't worry me at all. Athletes are asymmetrical. I mean, I have a player on our team who's a tight end who also plays basketball at LSU. He's a 1-foot jumper. Like, he's going to be asymmetrical because he jumps off 1 foot half the year. So I'm okay with that. It's not that big of a deal to me, as long as it's not having some major accompanying weakness and things like that. So I think about it 2-pronged. I think of weakness first, how strong is the athlete, and then what is the asymmetry I'm actually looking at. So I can actually real quick walk you through kind of like my waterfall of what it looks like. So if an athlete is above average strength and has less than a 15% asymmetry on an ISO test, they get no flags. They're fine. They're traditional. They don't need any intervention. If an athlete is below average strength relative to their position group and they have less than a 10% asymmetry, so they are symmetrical, they get a half flag because they're weak. If an athlete is above average strength, so they're strong, but they have a 15 to 20% asymmetry, I give them a half a flag. So they're strong, but the asymmetry is slightly elevated. So now I'm aware of it. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm doing something, but I'm generally aware. If an athlete is weak, so they're below average strength, and they have an asymmetry of 10% or more, they get a flag. Because now they have some level of asymmetry, but they definitely have weakness. So that's something to be aware of. If the athlete is strong, but their asymmetry is 20% or more, so it's just such a big asymmetry that I cannot ignore it, then I flag them, and then we do something about it. So, if I have an athlete who's really strong, but he has a 30% asymmetry, I need to be aware of that. Like, something's going on there. And we might come to the conclusion where it's okay. Maybe it's a quarterback who throws from, one side, or a pitcher or something, right? That's okay. If we can explain it, that's all right. But if we can't explain it, then we probably need to do something about it. But at the minimum, we need to see it, look at it, and be aware of it.
Are right side offensive linemen, left side offensive linemen, do they have very different slash asymmetrical ISO adductor tests?
I have not noticed that. No,
Oh, all right.
most of my guys haven't, and I think it's because they do other things too, right? Like they train, they sprint, they do so many other things besides just like a one-sided deal. But I have noticed it with quarterbacks because they're constantly rotating one way. I've noticed it with pitchers. They're constantly rotating one way. I've noticed it with basketball players that jump off of 1 foot primarily, and they're just like a 1 foot dominant jumper off one. I've noticed it that way. I've noticed it a lot with guys with prior injury, so there might still be an underlying issue there or some level of inhibition or things like that.
I wanna ask a question, Jordan, about my. That's not really a question. It's just more of a statement about my beef with the Nord board, and maybe you can give me some clarity on this. So here's my beef with the Nord board is that typically when I've seen the Nord board in action, right, like do your Nordic hamstring curl, do your ISO. Let's say I'm coming back from like hamstring strain. Most likely it was a biceps femoris injury, right? 80% of the time, whatever, 75% of the time it's biceps femoris injury. But if I get into the Nord board and I have a pre-existing bicep femoris injury and I start to like internally rotate my foot, I'm guarding against my bicep femoris. Now I'm using my semimembranosus, my semimembranosus, right? So I can get to like good Nord board numbers by guarding against my hamstring injury on the hamstring device. So I've always had this beef with the Nordboard because I walk around, I see people do Nordboard and like their feet are splayed, 1 foot's internal, 1 foot's external, both feet are neutral, and so I would love if you could give me some better answers as to how to better implement the Nordboard. I'm sure like if you're standing right there, I can control everything, right? But it's oftentimes not the case.
Yeah, it's a great point. Nothing's perfect, right? And this kind of goes back to like one of the big themes of what we're talking about right now. And when I think about data and I think about streams of data, like you're saying, there's an issue with the Nord board. Like you can rotate and bias other muscles. And that's totally true. And to answer your first question, I'm not sure what the fix is besides just coach the shit out of it. But what you can do is you can guardrail against being overly levered towards that one data stream. So like I was saying before, yes, I totally see your point with the issue of implementing the Nord board and someone guarding against something. But you can do that with a jump too. You can do that with a lot of things. You can go watch an ACL athlete jump after they've had a piece of their patellar put into their ACL, on a patellar graft. Like watch their knee flexion. They're going to guardrail about, by pushing their hips back and hinging a lot. So I think that happens in a lot of things. And again, it just kind of goes back to the point of let's not lever too much towards one data stream. Like the Nord board is flawed. CMJs are flawed. GPS is flawed. Everything's flawed to some extent, but for the most part, it's generally good. And if a lot of things are generally good, but we put them in a great system, all of a sudden it becomes heightened and a lot better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, in the world of in the sport, like one of the so Hunter and I have a Google Doc open right now, and we go back and forth over our questions and some of the things we're going to talk about. And one of the things that I had just written down is one data stream better than no data streams. And honestly, like maybe it's not right because you said like everything has issues. So it's not until you have potentially multiple good streams of data that you are able to make actionable decisions. And having one stream of data, like I have a Nord board and is asymmetrical. Let's create an intervention. It's like, well, that might be fucked up because you have one potentially flawed stream of data.
One of the things I wanted to hit real quick, Jordan, on this same topic was you were talking about your ISO 30 and talking about how certain guys will receive flags based on strength levels and based on asymmetry. Is there a flagging system based on changes from their norm? In terms of like maybe you have somebody that is strong, like really, really strong and symmetrical. Now this person may still fall into the same category, but you see more asymmetry present that keeps them in the same category, but this changing symmetry or this change in force, even if they are in the same zero flag category, like where does that fall into the system?
Yeah. Yes. It does incorporate that. So like I was saying before, the ISO 30 or any of my ISO tests, just ISO in general, soft tissue robustness can give you two maximum flags. One of which is strength and asymmetry, just what we went through, that little waterfall. And the other one is the trend. So regardless of what bucket you fall into, I take a Z score off of the 12-week time period. So even if you're really strong, but your Z is, -2, like all of a sudden your trend is significantly lower and you get flagged on that. So that to me is more of just a pure kind of acute fatigue type flag. So that way I'm not missing something where, hey, this athlete's really strong. They're not flagging on asymmetry, or anything like that. But there is something going on with the trend. And then we take a look at that. So specifically, I take peak force and I take a Z score off that. Again, I think I take 12 weeks, and that's how I do it. I am going to end up building in some asymmetry trends. So seeing the change in asymmetry, I was actually just talking to my director of sports medicine about this today, and it was something that we wanted to dive into a little bit more. He's been an integral piece to all of this, and I'm in his office 3 or 4 times a day. So it was another piece that we wanted to add into it. So yes, to answer your question, I absolutely look at trends. Right now, it's mostly peak force, Z score.
Got it. Makes sense. I want to dive into a topic that I love talking about, and that is force plates. Understanding that it is one stream, but I think there's a lot of value to it, and it's simple in the way that you're implementing it. It's a CMJ, it's modified reactive strength. I think that the thing that is interesting to talk about with this, and I don't know if there's a right answer. I don't think there's a right answer. There's probably wrong answers, but I don't think there's just one right answer, and it's detecting fatigue / readiness based off of this metric. And modified reactive strength is a very popular one and something that people talk about. People will talk about eccentric duration. People will talk about counter movement depth, certain things. But why, for you, did you settle on modified reactive strength?
Yeah. So first, there's a few reasons. So first off, there is research around modified reactive strength. So I can lean on that to start. Like a tech companies release an app and then they release updates. So my model and this system will continuously get updated by making it better. So I wanted to start with it just by partially keeping it simple. So there wasn't too many things going on. So I wanted to settle on a metric that I had confidence in, that I understood, and that everybody else understands. Because remember, it's not just me doing this. I've got a whole sports med department that is very involved in this. I've got football coaches that ask me, the rest of the strength staff, nutrition staff, the players. So I wanted to start with something that everybody knew, that everybody understood, that was easy to track and easy to think about. And that's basically why I stuck with it. And I have some issues with some of the other metrics, like counter movement depth, for example. I hear people talk about this all the time. They say, well, if the athlete sinks lower and they have a longer counter movement depth, then they must be fatigued because they're taking longer to produce force. And yeah, that makes sense in a nutshell, in a vacuum. But what happens when you're in season and your wide receiver who has patellar tendonitis, his patellar tendonitis gets better, right? If you have patellar tendonitis, you're not going to want to sink lower in a force plate jump, right? You're going to want to jump shallow. So he's actually having the opposite effect. His depth is getting less, but that's because he has some level of pain. So as he gets better from that patellar tendonitis pain, and let's say we're doing isos and they're working, the intervention's working, his depth is going to get bigger because he's able to flex his knees more, right? He's not going to have that inhibition. So all of a sudden he's going to flag for more counter movement depth when in reality, he's actually improving. Does that make sense? So a lot of people think counter movement depth means you're fatigued, but that's not really the case all the time.
Yeah, and it's hard to take some of these metrics, especially strategy-based metrics, and just like assume fatigue based off of that. And I think counter movement depth is one that I love from like a profiling standpoint, but to your point was well said.
It's a great example.
Yeah, with athletes that are experiencing some type of with a lot of the individuals I work with, just chronic discomfort in certain regions of their body, one being patellar tendon, it's like that is going to alter counter movement depth. I think the duration that they're spending at depth when you begin to layer metrics together depicts fatigue potentially a little bit better, because it could be the same counter movement depth, but a lot longer duration. And then you're like, okay, well, that could probably point to fatigue more so than just the depth at which they achieve. One of the things that I think is interesting to hear and really important, and you said earlier, like whenever you're just looking at a CMJ, like what if the warm up was different? And something I've noticed, and the example I'll use is like my training CMJs that I do throughout the week versus my pregame CMJs, drastically different. I'll have guys jump 10 to 12 to 15, maybe not 15. I don't know if I've ever seen that. That'd be a lie. Probably 6 to 10 centimeters better pregame just because of the environment. I let them do about 15 minutes of a on-court warm-up before they come jump versus within training it's embedded after one of our blocks of training. So with all that being said, what is your construction around when you collect your CMJ data, and are you trying to control for the environment as much as possible?
Yeah, great question. So in college football, it's really hard. So in the season, my starters are lifting twice a week. So, I've got the lifts are like 60 minutes long. So I've got 2 hours a week of a window of time where I can test these guys in the same session. So my counter movement jump session, I'm pulling them back as quickly as possible. But the reality is I can only control so much. There's too many moving parts. We got practice, we got lift, we got walkthrough, we got film study. They have classes. There's a lot going on. So I do my best. I have my assistant pull them back. They typically come at the same time throughout the lift, but it's not perfect. And again, I'm okay with that. I'm okay that it's not perfect because I can't make it perfect. Again, I've got 2 hours a week during the season. The off season is a little bit different. It's more controlled. I have more control over that. But the in season, it can't be perfect. It's okay that it's not perfect. And that's part of the reason I built this system in the first place. Again, I'm not levered towards one test. If a guy has a bad jump, yes, it'll get flagged, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to pull him out of practice. He's got a flag on a bunch of other things before we even start thinking about that. So, again, I control as much as I can, but it's college football, man. There's a lot of chaos and very little time.
And I mean, I think that's part of the beauty in data collection and trying to create these systems is like people talk about research grade, and you try to create as close to consistent data collection as possible. And like I'm in the same boat. I get guys in different orders, they get different amounts of warm-ups. We'll have a block of training before they jump within our training session. And I think that it's actually impossible to create research grade in the environment that we work in. But that's the beauty and the thing that you keep touching on of having these different data streams of like, it's pointing us in the right direction, and then you multiply them all together, and now it's really pointing us to a North Star, as opposed to, if you're just looking at CMJ data, the environment's going to be different, that's going to change things, but then when you couple it with all these other things, it carries a lot of weight.
Yeah, and there's a few things you can do statistically too. So like, if you're good with data, a Z-score is going to have some of that natural variation in there, right? Like that's a standard deviation. A Z-score is how many standard deviations away from the mean that you are. So if you do have a bit of variation in there because the lift and the chaos and all of that, it's actually okay as long as you have a normal bell curve over time, which you should if you collect enough data. Your Z-score will account for some of that. So I'm all right with that. It's okay that it's not perfect. Your Z-score should account for that. And the way that I'm currently flagging is I take a Z-score over 12 weeks from their RSI. So if it's down, 2 Zs, well, I know there's probably something going on, right? Yeah, maybe he came a little bit later in the lift or whatever, but like that's a pretty significant drop, So if I see that, I'm obviously going to talk to the athlete, and see what's going on. That's the first thing that's going on. But once they get flagged, I mean, everybody's aware of this, right? My sports med team, the rest of the staff, they know exactly what's going on. And we're all on the same page talking 24/7. And this is, driving communication of, hey, this guy jumped here. What's going on with this athlete? Oh, he's got patellar tendonitis pain. He came into the training room earlier. Okay, cool. That explains it. If there's no real answer to it, well, maybe the kid actually really is fatigued and it's clean, and most of the time, it is clean and there's a little bit of noise in the data, but that's any sport. Like you're saying, it's never going to be research grade. And quite frankly, that doesn't bother me at all. That's why you need good systems. And that's why people like us exist. We're not just lab researchers. We're actually coaches and practitioners that need to solve problems by making systems that solve issues like this, because we don't work in a lab. We work in the real world.
So the final touch point on that is that wellness questionnaire. I think this is something that we want to touch on briefly. I know it's there's one flag potential, but we'll still touch on it briefly. And this has been a question that we've asked so many guests, and we get different answers every single time. And so, can you just talk us through quickly the collection process of that questionnaire, and then what actually is on that questionnaire?
Yeah. So the collection process is the easiest thing in the world. We have an app. Our AMS system is in an app. The players all have access to it. We have Smartabase. So we use Smartabase for everybody. And then I have Power BI just kind of for me only. And that's where all this flagging stuff is. That's kind of where I get into the weeds. So on Smartabase, we have our questionnaire set up. The app is downloaded to all of our players' phones. They click on the app, or they can come into the weight room and go on an iPad. It's all hooked up for them, really easy. And they submit their questionnaire, and it takes them like 5 seconds. It's a couple sliders they do right on their phone or right on an iPad anywhere in the building, and they submit it, and we have them submit it 5 days a week. So very easy collection process. And do you ask what the questions were, Mike? Was that part of your question? Yeah. So the questions that they have are: how many hours of sleep did they get? What was the quality of your sleep? How motivated are you to train? How sore are you? How energized are you? How stressed are you? And how many meals did you eat yesterday? And that's
And
it.
what's
So
your
it's
scale for those?
pretty simple. So how many hours did you sleep goes from 1 to 12. And then everything else is a 0 to 10 scale, except for the meals are 1 to 5. So meals 1 to 5, hours of sleep anywhere from 1 to 12, and then everything else is 0 to 10.
With that, do you end up getting a lot of fives?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So yeah, super important. So most people do not fill out the questionnaires accurately at all because they slide them all the way to tens, which everyone loves to point out. And I criticize this a lot for a while because we've had them the whole time. Our former head coach wanted the questionnaires. So that's originally where they came from. But when an athlete is beaten up, they will tell us. They will be accurate with us. So especially like in fall camp, those numbers come down quick. So I really actually don't care if the athletes slide them all the way to tens all the time. I probably shouldn't say that, but it doesn't bother me because I know that when they're actually beaten up, they won't do that because I see
Yeah,
it.
that's
It's
an
all the
interesting.
time. I'm telling you, it's all the time. So I actually flag it. I catch it. It all runs off Z-scores in my model. I generally go off the total wellness score, which is an aggregate off of all those questions. And then the soreness question is the one with the highest variance. So when they're sore, that's the question that they'll go on. So I flag those two and it works like a charm. So it doesn't bother me at all that the guys aren't accurate with it because when they get beaten up, they will be, and I'll find it.
Yeah, that's a good point because I track practice RPE. I just ask the guys how hard we practice every day, and I'll always get two, three, like twos, threes, twos, threes, twos, threes, and then it'll be like one, and I'll be like, okay, cool, that was planned based off the proximity to a game, and then I'll get some like fours, and I'll get a five, and I'll be like, whoa, and like those two threes, you just okay, cool, and then you get that like 4.5, and you're like, oh shit, like that probably wasn't a 4.5 objectively, like why are you telling me 4.5? So it does flag when it needs to be flagged for sure.
100%. We did RPs for a while. That I got rid of it when I became the director. I just I think there's probably utility in other sports like basketball, Hunter, where your team is smaller. I've got 120 guys, and I also think that like in football, there's something to be said for asking somebody how hard practice was. Like that's kind of the nature of football. And even though I'm a sports scientist, I am kind of an old school football guy. So, I don't want to ever feel like I'm injecting any like softness into the program. Not saying that you're doing that. It's just in a football environment, I could see how somebody would take it that way, and it's just kind of unique to the sport where I just didn't like the vibe of it. So
Yeah,
I got rid of it.
I
But I think
still
it's got great utility in other sports.
I still get guys that'll say ones and twos even on our biggest day of the year because they're like, yo, it's easy. And but then I know that like, okay, you'll give me ones and twos, but like there's probably six guys that like really think about it every single time. And I'm like, those are like my data points that I cling more closely to get a general idea of one, how those guys are feeling, but potentially how the team is feeling. Because yeah, some of those guys are like, one, it was easy. It's like, dude, I know that was not a one. You're dead right now.
So, Jordan, we've talked about the tests, we talked about how you collect them, what you collect. Let's talk about a little bit the intervention. And you have a list of interventions, and you've talked about how the last intervention you want to have to do is actual practice modification. We want to try to stay away from that. So can you just take us through some of these, and maybe we can start with like, because there's a handful of different ones. So maybe just start from the bottom and go up. You know, you start to see these flags, your first intervention processes, all the way to okay, we have to actually make changes to what's happening on a day-to-day practice plan.
Pretty cool. Yeah. So the intervention list from bottom to top. Number one, just general awareness among coaches and support staff. So just creating general awareness. This is just super underrated, right? Just making people aware of what's going on with the athlete, what's the readiness of the team, what risk are certain people running, and just making people aware. It gets people in a high performance environment over time. And even if you're not making a direct intervention, those things will happen naturally over time because the organization becomes a high performance organization. This takes time. You got to be patient with it, but general awareness of player availability, all of that type of stuff makes a huge difference. So that's quote unquote intervention number one. Number two, targeted nutrition supplementation. Number three, changes to S&C training itself. Number four, nutrition plans, interventions there. So that'd be custom nutrition plans from the head dietitian. Number three, ISOs with the athletic trainers or treatment. Number four, the next one would be extra ISOs or training with strength and conditioning. So that is actually like pulling in a group of guys that need single leg ISOs for their hamstring or something along those lines. That's extra stuff on top of just the general base S&C card, right? So that's like individualized training. And the last one, the most invasive, is actual practice modifications. So I start from bottom to top, and I try not to hit the top as best I can. So if I can keep it to things like ISOs, nutrition interventions, changes to strength and conditioning, treatment, general awareness, things like that, we try to do those first before we meddle in practice. Because again, practice is how we get better at the sport. We don't want to pull out practice. If you need to reduce practice, that is a bad thing, right? That's not a good thing. Sports scientists are so quick to want to pull out practice and, manipulate workloads and all of that. To me, that stuff is so overrated. You're getting in the way of actually practicing for an opponent you're about to play. So that's the last thing I try to do. It is necessary at times. And when it is necessary, I pound the table for it and it generally gets done. But I try to avoid doing that. And that's part of the reason we have this, is so we can find things before they become a problem. And we can intervene before we need to go to a coach and say, hey, we recommend this guy doing less practice or no practice.
How often how often has that happened this year? For example, like, are you weekly going to coach and saying like, hey, we should reduce? And then also like, are you at the point now where they will? Or is there situations when they're like, sorry, no, he needs to practice?
Yeah. So the workflow of this is I run it on a Sunday and I send it out on Sunday night or Monday morning with a detailed email to the entire support staff. If we feel like the head coach needs it, we'll give it to him, depending on the amount of guys in there. And then I will meet personally one-on-one with position coaches on Monday. I don't meet with all of them because not all of them need it. I tailor everything towards every individual, as is. But there are some coaches I meet with on a weekly basis and a daily basis. So like my corners coach, we talk every Monday morning, typically. My wide receivers coach, we talk every single day. So that's kind of the workflow of this. We run it at the beginning of the week. We get a risk rating at the beginning of the week. And then if we need to make a practice modification for someone, that happens generally over the entire week. It's way simpler, way easier. What I see some people do is they they'll practice on Tuesday and then they try to manipulate the workload on like a Thursday or a Wednesday. And to me, that just becomes super erratic and kind of chaotic. And I can do that with certain position coaches that I meet with like on a daily basis. And we're just super locked in with where every little, metric is. But generally speaking, I really don't like to do that. I think it just is kind of chaotic. So if the guy needs less workload, we'll tell the position coach, hey, generally this week, this guy's going to be a little bit limited. So we can do something like indie drills, and scout periods only. And then it's just a general thing that happens across the week. And it gets done, and it gets done so much better than trying to manipulate every single day and what drills are they doing and all of this. And it's just way more straightforward, and everybody is just on the same page. So yeah, they listen. They're really good about it. And I pretty much, if we have an intervention that's not practice related, I mean, it gets done every time. We're just on the same page as our sports med staff. We're super close with them. We all did this project together. So yes, I built it, but I ran it by all of them first. That's how I do everything. So everybody has a hand in it. So everything gets done pretty much at a high level. And yeah, there are times where I may recommend like a practice reduction and somebody doesn't get that. It's kind of rare-ish at this point. But if they don't get that, there's a real reason for it that probably is more important. And that would be like, hey, the guy, is playing a massive role this week. He has a great matchup. We need him to practice. Or maybe he's a second string guy that's in a new role and he just needs the reps. I'm good, man. Like, as long as we're aware of it and they have the information, and that's my recommendation, if the football coaches have said, hey, it's more important that this guy gets the practice this week and we're okay taking that risk, I'm good with it. As long as we know the risk, it's good, and sometimes the technical and tactical demand of the sport will outweigh the physical potential limitation or risk. And I'm totally good with that. And that's why we have an organization, right? That's why a sports scientist doesn't run practice. We just help support it. And I'm totally good if we decide that certain practice modifications don't need to be made. It's rare, but it happens, and it usually happens for good reason.
Jordan, I'm going to ask you, this is the last question. It's going to be a two-pronged question, and this is going to be our final question. Hopefully wrap this up well, and if hopefully your laptop stays alive for this. But that two-part question is, number one, can you give us an example of like a case study that you had this season that you took an athlete through? And then also, the second part to that question is, as you continue to iterate, what are the things that you're trying to continue to improve on within the system to make it even more efficient?
Yeah, I'll give you two. One was a practice scenario and one was not. So we did have a player who was flagging red hot with me. I recommended a practice modification. He was also a player that had prior injury, which is something I still need to add into this model. But he had prior injury, and I recommended, hey, this guy needs a workload reduction. He was flagging during a pretty big opponent week. We were playing a conference opponent, SEC opponent, but we had a bye week the next week. So what we said is, hey, let's have him practice, because he's a really important player for us. He plays like every snap. Let's have him practice this week. Let's limit him where we can. So I think we put him in indie drills and scout periods for the most part, but it's just important that he was in team periods. So let's limit him where we can. And then during the bye week, we'll give him some kind of vet days. And like, he'll literally just take the day off. And that's what we did. So he made it through that week fine. We supported him with extra treatment. We're aware of him, right? He generally takes care of himself very well, but we were aware of it. And then we got to the bye week and we gave him multiple days off. I think he took 2 days off of practice. We're just hyper aware of this kid. And he's a former ACL. So he did it last year. So we didn't want to take too much risk with him. And sure enough, everything bounced back like the next week, easy. He actually PR'd on his CMJ. He hit like an 8-month PR or 9-month PR the next week. Obviously his GPS numbers came down. Everything was like spot on. So it was great, and that happens all the time. Like we do that. That's just one example of many, but we do that all the time, and it's usually not in a form of a player actually not practicing. That's actually kind of rare. It's usually just, hey, let's do a little less indie this day. Simple stuff that makes a big difference because these athletes are young and elite level athletes that will respond to small interventions. But that's just one example of kind of a major practice reduction that we actually made that worked like a charm. The other one, a non-practice reduction example, we have a corner who's a very good player on our team and will be a very good player in the NFL. He was having major signs of issues with his hamstrings. His right hamstring was like significantly weak, was trending down for a while. and his asymmetry was touching like low 30s. This was during training camp. So we were aware of this and pretty concerned about it. We put him on an ISO protocol, and it took about 2 months, but he is now under 5% asymmetry. He never missed any practice because of that issue at all. And both of his hamstrings are now currently, like as of last Thursday, so a couple days ago, all-time highs on strength on that particular test. So he took care of himself. We gave him a plan. He did it, and it worked great. Never had to pull the kid out of practice for that particular issue.
And then as a kind of a final, as you said, like, hey, we want to add an injury history to this as something that we can continue to grow toward. As a kind of final question toward this entire process, in addition to that, I guess what else? Like, what is the final product that you envision in your mind that has yet to come to fruition on this already very, very impressive framework?
Yeah, two main things. On top of having injury history logged in there, which we kind of just handle that with our AT staff as is. So it is sort of in there, but officially put it into the model. And then for GPS, the way I think about GPS is you have relative metrics. So what are you doing relative to the past? That's like an acute to chronic or a Z-score, a weekly Z-score, a composite Z-score. Any one of those are great. I use both Z-scores and acute to chronic. But the problem is those are all relative to your prior history. So if I'm really high all the time and I just do that all the time, my Z-scores and acute to chronic might look totally normal. But if I'm just, way too high, like if I would be practicing 5 hours a day, obviously we know that's way too much, right? We just know that as practitioners. We know we can't do 3 a days forever and, last. So you need to have some absolute number. And the best one that I've come across is how much game loads of work are you doing per week? So like how much total distance are you covering a week in terms of game loads? I got this idea from Joel Reinhardt, who's currently the director of S&C at Lafayette, I think. A good friend of mine, really bright guy. And he was talking about how they use it. And like, if you're hitting 3 game loads a week of total distance or acceleration load, like that's a pretty good barometer. So that's something I'm going to look at adding in. And then being a little more robust with the CMJ, like expanding on the whole MRSI thing and adding in asymmetries to that and all of that. But those are just a couple of the changes that I will be making. Absolutely, man.
All right, Jordan, as we wrap here. So first of all, like that game loads per week, 3 times per week, I think that's super interesting and a super, super solid addition to that. In terms of our wrap, though, I know that we are quickly running out of life here on that computer. So let's get you out of here. Do me a favor, though. There's a ton of information here. There's a ton of great information here. You continue to put out great information. Can you please just tell us where we can go find that, where we can look more into that, find out what you're doing?
Yeah. I put out a lot of stuff on my LinkedIn. That's kind of where I put all my long form stuff, presentations, kind of like bloggy-ish posts. They're not too long. They're easy reads, like 1 minute or so. But I put long form there, and I put periodically some shorter form stuff on my Instagram. That's all I have, LinkedIn and Instagram. I'm very responsive to people. So if people have questions or they need help, message me on Instagram, DM me, and I get back to people like ASAP.
Awesome, Jordan. Appreciate you, man. If you haven't listened to our first episode, please do. I mean, Jordan, I think that you talked about your position at LSU being one of one. Your background in performance is also one of one. So definitely a whole lot of lessons to be learned. So appreciate your time. Appreciate you jumping back on here with us for round 2. And we'll drop this one actually pretty soon. So yeah, dude, thanks a lot, man.
Awesome, bro. Thanks for having me, man. I love being on this podcast.